Hello, everyone. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Peter Hunt, the founder and managing director of Loft Hunt. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really, really well, Harris. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem at all. It's an absolute pleasure of ours to have you on today. We're very excited and excited to get straight into it.
Super, me too.
So, Peter, if we can start off, I guess, right from the very beginning of the whole
Yeah.
journey, how did it all start? What is your background? What does your journey look like getting to the position you're in? Perhaps if you can walk us through some challenges you went through getting to the position you're in today.
Absolutely. Well, mine certainly wasn't a straight road. Firstly, down to London, and then secondly into the London property market. So, as you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from London. I'm from a tiny little village in County Durham, and it was always my intention to go into law. So, my dad's side of the family are all lawyers. My granddad said to me when I was a kid. My dad was the only one who didn't go into law. He was a grass cutter. And my granddad always said, you're going to be a lawyer like your granddad, not a grass cutter like your dad. That was the goal. I didn't really have a choice. So I studied in Newcastle, did my law degree, I did my legal practice course and masters as well, specialising in property. And then I moved down to London with my first ever partner at the time. Complete new challenge, massive city compared to Durham and Newcastle, what I was used to. And I worked for a company that specialised in developing old warehouses, factories, churches. And I was started on the legal side doing the conveyancing. And to be honest with you, and this is me being brutally honest, it was purely financial why I moved from sitting in a very corporate seat just doing conveyancing. I think I was paid something like £20,000 a year as a trainee, and I was looking at some of these guys buying and selling like £3 million cool warehouse apartments. The company's getting 2%, that's 60 grand. They're getting 20% of that, and they're doing two of those a month. And I was like, goodness me, I could do that job. I'm in the wrong seat here to go to the pub at around 2 o'clock as they've just exchanged contracts. And I was like, you know what, I wouldn't mind a little piece of that. So I said, I'll do sales for a little while, and if I'm rubbish, because I'd never worked in a sales job before, if I'm rubbish, I can always go back to law. I've got that. And then I kind of did that for the next 6 or 7 years in various different roles. Eventually being the account manager for Central East London for Urban Spaces, who were the original loft property agencies. So they had an affiliation with Manhattan Loft Corporation, who were the first developers to actually take these old, sexy printworks in Clerkenwell, big high ceilings, concrete brickwork, just an artist or a creative's dream, and it typically unfashionable postcodes back then, developing them. And I they piggybacked on other developers, and then we were the agency that were instructed to sell most of them. So I did that for a while, and I kind of felt like I'd taken my career in a sales side as far as I could. And the next step for me was very much, how do I start up my own agency? Do I go into business with somebody else? But then it come down to the crux of what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. I kind of lost the buzz a little bit, and I was probably mature beyond my years when I looked at how I came to the decision to start my business, because I actually looked at what my favorite parts of the role that I was in were,
Yeah.
and it wasn't so much the selling or showing people around the properties. It was actually getting to know the buyers, the people who had registered with Urban
Right.
Spaces, and thinking, well, we've got 20, 30 properties on our books for sale. What you want is very specific. How can I use the database that we've got, me understanding your requirements, and making a deal happen that never would have happened? And that was something that I really found interesting and kind of kept me on my toes a little bit. So then I looked at various different options, and then it hit me that there was a massive niche in the market. So say in your instance, Harris, say you were, I don't know, you were a part-time graphic designer in your spare time. You had 2.5 million quid burning a hole in your pockets, and you were like, you know what? I really want to get on the property ladder or step on the property ladder, but I want to run my business from my property. Now, if the modern house, urban spaces, or some of the high-end local agents haven't got that very niche demographic of plan permission and general property, you know, that lends itself to home working,
Yeah.
where do you go? That's where Loft Hunt was born. So
Oh,
we're the only buying agency that specifically help people find unique properties, whether or not it be for a bachelor who just wants a really cool place to kind of just be cool and loads of brickwork and houses, or whether you're in this hypothetical situation where you're a graphic designer, whether somebody wants to take advantage of this niche planning permission, which we can talk about a little bit later if you like, called live work, where essentially you can run a business from home and not pay business rates, only pay council tax, because the building was converted purely for live work purposes. It was born in Hackney in the early 90s, where they had all of these run down buildings. Lots of local residents felt quite close to them because of the architectural significance of them. So the council were very clever and said, right, you know, we'll give you this, and that's how people like artists like Tracy Emin and people like that all started out. Andy Warhol, you know, they all kind of piggybacked off this very clever scheme of the council. So yeah, so that's in a very broad way my day-to-day work looks like. In our hypothetical situation, I would take you out for a coffee or a pint, or you know, whatever your drop of choice is. Get under your skin as to what you think you want, what you think you need, what I know. Give you some ideas on how we can refine that, and then I go out and view all of the properties on your behalf. Some of them will be on the market, some will be off market. Negotiate the price, because I've only ever worked in this kind of macro market of London.
yep.
And I can't say this for a fact, but I've probably been involved in more transactions in the last 12 years than any single person in the market.
Okay.
You know, I know what these places are worth, and then given my legal background as well, I also manage the legal process as well. So from us first meeting and you going onto Loft Hunt's website and having a meeting inquiry, to you getting the keys when we successfully bought you a place, you've only got one point of contact, and that's me. And that's probably why I feel like I'm one of the luckiest guys in the city, because, you know, the fulfillment of seeing people, as cringe and as cliche as it sounds, when you've been in that journey with somebody, you know that purchase probably wouldn't have happened had it not been for your expertise and your company's profile. It's a real buzz.
Absolutely. I guess that was my follow-on question is what gives you the most motivation and where do you get the most fulfillment? Is it the acknowledgement? Is it the awards? Or is it that, internal fulfillment that you've helped somebody achieve their dream? Because obviously you've found somebody a beautiful place to live, but also a place to work as well. And whether they're
Yeah,
running a business, whether they're a part of a big company, that is in a sense fulfillment, because that's going to be able to provide for themselves. So what actually is a big driving force for you pushing the business further and further? Is it the financial side or is it the sort of fulfillment side of things?
well, from a personal perspective, it's definitely the fulfillment side. And you know, I've had a chat with these clients prior to coming on, so I've got permission without saying their names. But I think it's given case studies, will give you a real and your listeners a real clear flavour of just how fulfilling the role can be for me and the business is for me. So there was a guy, a Canadian guy, him and his wife, Canadian guy, British wife. They met when he was a trader in the city, when he was in the she was a West End actress, he was a trader. They met, fell in love, got married. He wanted to go to Canada. He worked in the oil and gas industry. Very, very successful guy. She wanted to stay in London, naturally, for the West End. That was her home. She said, I'll do this with you, Michael, but the only way I'm going to agree to it is once our eventual kids move out and we get to retirement age, we've got to move back to London. So that was their search. Michael, 3 gorgeous daughters, really, really lovely family. They were excited about their parents' new chapter, and they came back over to London and they searched themselves for 6 months. He was kind of semi-retired, took a hell of a lot of time, a lot of stress as well, because it was something that his wife was super keen on. She'd already moved into a place before they knew what it was, and we met and this is how I probably get about half of my clients through previous clients. A client who I bought something for in Shoreditch had said, who was also in the she was a set designer for West End shows.
Ah,
Put me in touch with Michael's wife. I met Michael, and they were super stressed. Like, this is a guy who owns oil and gas plants in Canada, like an absolutely double Dutch to me, a super, super successful and industry leader in what he does. And he was really down in the dumps. And within sort of 2 months, because their search was so broad, they had an idea of what the place looked like, but they didn't know what they wanted from an area. They didn't know what they needed in terms of the type of property. So she was actually going to do some set design work herself, which meant she needed a factory, not a warehouse, because the walls are much thicker, the ceilings are much higher, the windows are much brighter. A lot of people confuse the things. Michael really liked the cool areas around Shoreditch and Hackney. Sean was very much a West London girl, so I like as cool as Hackney is, and I do so much business there. She was never going to live in Hackney. And that whole, I can't envisage a situation where they would have ended up with their perfect place, which was the entire first floor, 5,000 square feet in a converted piano factory in Fulham. It was incredible. Yeah, I just don't think that would have happened had I not held the hand through even just the working out what you want phase. And to be invited around for dinner, with West End actors, and now they're friends, and then they put me in touch with like some of their best friends from Canada who wanted to buy a flat for their daughter. She's now a friend, and it sounds really, again, I don't want to sound too corny, I don't want to come across like that, but it just so happens to be the truth.
yeah.
Like, I haven't had a client that I've successfully bought a loft for that hasn't become part of my social network, even if it's just to a small extent.
Yeah.
That, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is super, super fulfilling. On the growth side of the business, and this is something I've got to be brutally honest about, that's something that, we're keen to do, we're in a position to do. But it's the significant challenge is finding somebody else to do what I do with the same kind of enthusiasm and passion and knowledge base. Now, they are out there, I'm sure they are, but I haven't got to that stage yet.
Amazing. I really love that story. So thank you, B. I think that hits the nail on the head in regards to fulfillment and doing what you do, loving what you do. It's all
Yeah,
well and good hitting financial targets and it's great. But if you're able to actually make an impact and improve people's lives and their future for the better, what more could you ask for in terms of
yeah,
business, gratuity, and success? So amazing story. Thank you for that.
that's all right, no problem at all.
Amazing. So with that, Peter, if we can transition on to the next area of the topic, which would be
Yeah.
industry trends. So what are some industry trends and shifts within the industry that you're seeing within property, within buying, selling property, etc. And how do you see them sort of, overcoming and sort of trickling out over the next few months?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. So not only is it very relevant to my business, but I think just across the property board, I think the whole idea of not just working from home, but the whole kind of co-living in a specific to central London. I think COVID was a disaster, but in the same breath, it was a massive blessing in terms of developing trends of the way people live in central London. I mean, it was kind of COVID that gave me the kick up the backside to start my business, because all of a sudden, somebody who's in it, I've just done a deal with a guy who's, an investment banker. And, normally they're they're on the floor, they're in the office, they're in front of, and now, it's commonplace for them to be working from home for, 1 to 2 days a week. And, the guy bought an old pork warehouse in Bermondsey. But a big part of his requirements was somewhere where he could zone off. It was in his, which is obviously why lofts help, because they're big and spacious, but where he could actually zone it off, and that was his work area. And I think that's something that certainly the developers that I've spoken to recently they're trying to when they're having the initial consultation with the architects, that whole, even if it's like a studio flat, you've got kind of an area zone for work, and that's something that I can only see developing as time goes on.
Got ya, got ya.
Yeah.
Is it the case where people want that flexibility now? Because working from home and co-working spaces are a massive trend at the minute, like touched on. So
Mm.
is that, aligned well with the growth of your business? And does that, coincide quite well with your business? And how are you looking to take advantage of that trend?
Well, I think just by the architectural makeup of the buildings that I'm helping people buy properties in, that if you're buying a classroom in an old Victorian schoolhouse, a 450 square foot flat, which is a relatively modest one bedroom flat, feels like 700 square feet when you've got 4 meter high ceilings and
Yeah.
amazing windows and whatever. And I think I don't want to sound hypocritical here, but there's an argument that people are losing a lot of synergy from just work, from being back in the office, and you can do all the Zoom calls in the world. But I'm actually a big believer of three people sat in a room face to face across the table. I think, and you're seeing commercial trends of that as well. I think Google have got more than half of their staff back in their offices in King's Cross now, whereas before that was all co-working. But I think what it's done, it's made it less of a kind of commercial scarcity to do that. And obviously, because these properties that I'm helping people source and find, perfectly made up for them, it can only be a good thing for Loft Hunt.
That's great.
Yeah.
Perfect. So now, Peter, if we come on to more, social media in terms of, the past few years being a massive trend in any industry. So how big of an impact does social media make on your business and the industry? And how do you see
Mm.
social media developing to actually helping the business grow to the next level? Is social media something you're taking advantage of? Or is that something perhaps you're still, getting your business to navigate towards to?
Yeah, so this is a really relevant question for me as well, Harris. So you've nailed it there. So I'm very lucky. Again, I keep going back to this, but it's we do a thing called Loft of the Day. So every day
Yeah.
on our Instagram and our Facebook, we post a building, and it might not necessarily be a flat in a building that we've actually purchased, but it's the
Yeah.
type of thing that somebody can expect for me to find should they sign up with Loft Hunt. And because all of these properties are really sexy, excuse the turn of phrase, property porn, it really is, they're really attractive on the eye. We managed, I think we're on about 2,200 followers without paying a single penny for any
Wow.
promotion or anything like that, which isn't too bad. To answer your question in a more general term, I should be doing so much more. So a good friend of mine, and I know he won't mention me dropping his name in because he's all over social media anyway. But a good friend of mine, Grant Bates, I actually took his seat in Urban Spaces when he left to go to Hamptons International. He has made a monumental effect on the Islington market in particular, and the way properties are presented. He was kind of the yardstick for almost like the American broker model, where you walk into a property, he pulls up in his Porsche, he opens the door, and it's all a little bit. I don't know if I could take myself seriously enough to do it, but sorry, lost you there for a second. Yeah, but he managed to. I mean, he sold houses for £9.5 million in Hackney, in an area of Hackney where 10 years ago, it was literally murder mile. He sold houses at that level purely off the way he's presented them. It's absolutely remarkable. And I think, we've had the ideas at Loft Hunt, and I'm almost certainly going to do this, but where, we have client testimonials, because the story I've just told you, Harris, I think is a really, really great example. And there's 50, 60, 70 of those where, and all of my clients, like I said this to you the first time we chatted, the demographic of person who would rather live in a converted water laboratory rather than just a standard new build. They tend to be cool people, good on camera, and fellow artists, creatives. If they could see, my fine art photographer who I've just completed the deal with on Friday, if they were to see how interesting she is, how enthusiastic, how good the process was, that would tell the story a hell of a lot better than black and white blurb, as interesting as it might
Yeah.
be, because it's real. I think social media is so important. And again, I sound hypocritical saying it because I don't utilize it anywhere near as much as I should, but it's certainly something I'm going to be looking into as this year progresses.
Amazing, amazing. And in terms of, social media being a powerhouse and is what it is, what
Mm,
would your goal and the main derivatives be from social media? Would it be, for example, getting your brand out and getting seen more? Is it building
mm,
that network of people who you can collaborate with, and or what is actually the goal with social media you'd be looking to achieve? Because obviously with social media, everyone's looking to achieve different things. Some people just
mm.
want to tell their story, right?
Yeah.
And be able to be a beacon and a guiding light for other people on a similar
Mm.
journey. Some people want to get themselves out there, and some people only care about doing business, and that's it. So, what is important to you, and how best would you use the power of social media in 2025?
Yeah. So I think if you kind of look at this as like a pyramid of where Loft Hunt is at the minute, we've got a solid foundation. We've got a really, really solid foundation. And if you consider the tip of the pyramid where I want the business to be in 5 years, that next step for me, sorry, just to go back, the foundation that I've managed to build is that I dare say it, 90% of the sales managers who were in areas where there are loft apartments and things, they give me the early heads up on these things. Developers who were looking to buy sites, they know Pete Hunt from Loft Hunt. They'll ask for my opinion, and that's all great. And I'm getting the influx of people just wanting my advice, people saying, by the way, Pete, I've got this. And that's obviously a massive advantage for my clients because they get in there before. I think
Patience.
yeah, yeah. The demographic of person who wants to, wants to buy that sort of property tend to be, they tend to be brand aware. They tend to be more forward thinking in the way they go about these things. And I think if that was just if Lofton was the go-to place and they've made it, yeah, those type of people, in my experience, if they've psychologically conditioned themselves, they want to buy a property, they've got the money in the bank, they don't want to wait around. We are until somebody else decides to do it. We're the only place to go to find that. So brand awareness is massive, and then obviously the goal at the end is for us to be the biggest buying agency for unique properties in London. It's easy to do that now because we're the only one, but I don't expect to be the only one forever. So establishing that while I've got that niche is super, super important.
Amazing. Very well said. Now, yeah, I guess my follow-up question was, what is the most important thing in actually achieving that goal, right? Is it delivering that bespoke personal service that people really sought after? Is it finding the best property at the best price? What would actually keep yourselves in, Loft Hunt as the pivotal market leader in terms of that
Yeah.
space? Say 5, 10 people are coming in the space. What do you think is the most important thing to actually resonate with customers and make yourself stand out?
That's a great question. And the answer is an amalgamation of all of those things. So it's not just you've got somebody who loves these properties as much as they do. It's not just that you've got somebody who's experienced and who knows the law behind buying them. And it's not just about knowing the value of these places also. It's about the entire journey. That the journey and the potential hiccups. I mean, I say this to my potential clients all the time. For a lot of people, a property purchase is going to be the most important, one of the biggest decisions they'll make in their lives. And how many times have you heard it in the pub, over a business meeting, whatever, or you're buying something, oh yeah, it's been a nightmare. This came back on the survey. Yeah, the lawyers on the other side have just been an absolute nightmare. And we've had this problem with this and this and this. And we've found something we absolutely love, but we just don't know how to turn it from this into this. Like I've got contacts are the best surveyors, the best lawyers, architects who almost exclusively only work with old industrial buildings, and that's their niche. And that's a network that's been built up of 12 years. And there'll be people in London, I'm convinced, that have worked in this space for longer than me. Some of them are friends of mine, most of them are friends of mine, but none of them have that kind of and I'm not an ego guy, please, I hope I don't come across like that, but none of them have that kind of genuine passion for making sure the end goal for the client's the best it possibly can be and utilising an entire network through that. So Savills or Knight Frank could open a unique property buying agency team of 5 people now, but it would take them a lot of years to get to the point where they can honestly say they know what's best for a north-facing flat in a school conversion photographer versus, a two-bed muse house for a musician who needs sound insulation. Like it's the idiosyncratical details, are things that that only come with experience.
Absolutely. Perfect. Very well said. Now, Peter, if we
Cheers.
can hone in more business centered and business focused, what are some areas that are going really well for the business and you're going strength from strength? And what are some areas that perhaps you're having some challenges with the business that you're looking to overcome? What are some areas that perhaps are holding you back? And what are
Mm.
some ways you're looking to overcome them?
Yeah. So what I think we're doing really well is the operational sense of the business. I've got my cousin who looks after all of the marketing for me. He's ex Ogilvy. He's got a business now that is, him and his partner were Forbes 30 under 30 a few years ago. Really successful guy. And then I've got my uncle John, who does all of the boring stuff, make sure that everything's legit in the background, all of the finance, all of the accounts, all of that's dealt with by him. And then I've got my Anthony, who he was like director of operations for Asia for Oracle for like 20 years. So
Ah,
like, a really super successful guy, and now lives in Dubai and has his own tech consultancy. And what that kind of infrastructure behind me allows me to do is just make sure that I'm client first, and that's the most important thing. And that kind of leans nicely into where what's holding us back is there's only one of me, and obviously growth's very important, but I just think having another person who and I don't know what that person looks like yet, and getting three very successful, very busy people who do what they can to help me all in a room together to really focus in on what the next step is. That is a bit of a challenge, because I think until I do that, until I understand what the business needs, not just what I need and what I think this person looks like, it would be foolhardy of me to think that I know all the answers, or that my vision's great, because again, another cliche: two heads are better than one, five heads are better than two, all of that. I
yeah.
think that's something that's a particular struggle for me at the minute.
Very well said. Very well said. Now, in
Yeah.
terms of growth, obviously
Mm.
finding somebody who operates like yourself, is that the main way of growth, or do you think perhaps having somebody come in the team that can handle some of the stuff that perhaps you are handling, would that also be a way to grow as well? Because you could find somebody who's doing what you're doing, or you could find somebody who perhaps does things that you're not as great at and can take care of that. Would that be a way to grow as well? Are you very
Okay.
focused on the communication, the client side of things?
No,
Right?
I think that's something that, look, I'm very much an open book when it's my first business, right?
Yeah.
And I've had to lean on people who've had multiple businesses, and I'm very lucky for that. But obviously, I am the one that's gonna essentially turn Loft Hunt into the business I know it can be. I could quite easily do what I'm doing now, earn a very good living, and just keep doing that. But I don't think there's a ceiling for this. I would love one day for every single estate agency in London to, when they have a one-off warehouse conversion for sale and they can't sell it, all of the buyers that register for that, there'll be a referral scheme to Loft Hunt, and they get part of my fee every time someone they refer. Because the estate agents get paid by the sellers. So a lot of these buyers who are just looking for warehouses, they're potential Loft Hunt clients, and the revenue scheme for that is vast. There's that that, and that's just one way that kind of one avenue, one kind of star we can prick from the sky that could turn Loft Hunt from a 500,000 quid a year business to a 10 million quid a year business. And those are all things that that anything that can help me get towards that goal, I'm open to having a chat about.
I'm really excited to see that, and hopefully that journey, is going to be very successful and a smooth one. But that's amazing to hear. And I
Yeah,
guess coming now on to the future, I know
yeah,
you've touched on it, and we kind of, understand. But I guess what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for yourself and Loft Hunt? What are the
yeah.
main metrics you're focused on achieving? And what are some of the big goals on the vision board that you think you're looking to achieve very quickly?
Yeah. So within the next 6 to 12 months, a big thing is making Loft Hunt a social media presence. That's a big goal.
Yeah.
I think from a financial perspective, we want to make sure that we stay at a level where the business is growing 10% year on year. That's been
Yep.
the goal in terms of revenue. And then I'd love to have somebody else on board by the end of the year.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
If you were to, for example, one major change within the business or within the industry, if you could solve one major problem, one major issue within the business or within the industry that's perhaps holding you back, what would that be?
Uh,
It could be across regulation, it could be within compliance, it could be within any measures. If you could click your fingers and make that change that would
yeah.
propel the industry, propel the business forward, what would that be?
Less emails, more talking.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and I realise that's probably not where you're going with it, but that's the first thing that come into my mind. I think there's so many lazy people in the industry that earn a pretty good that earn a six-figure salary by sending out an email, opening a door, and selling a property. And I think there's so many people out there who are doing that because it's super, super easy. If they just picked up the phone and kind of did what I did, a guy from a relatively humble Britain, in the Northeast, come down to London and make a success of myself. That's because a conversation doesn't always just have one focus point. I always like to think of them as trees. You've got the core, you've got the trunk of the tree, and there's so many branches that can flower at the end of them, and so many people are just focused on the trunk. I think there's so much untapped business, and because the London property market's I say it's so busy. There's just stats out. Last week to show for the first year that London only grew by 1.9% in the last 12 months,
Ah,
which is the lowest in the last 4 or 5 years, I think. But because the industry is so busy and there's so much money there already, I just think if people just hear without trying to sound too philosophical about it, and if people just talk more and ask more questions and two ears and one mouth and use them in that context, especially on the sales side of the industry, I think more business would get done and crucially more clients to be happier because they'd be finding properties to buy or sell.
amazing. When I speak to people all across the world and some of the successful people, the biggest
Mm.
thing, and I guess it goes to the saying, great minds think alike, a lot of people really have a negative stance with people emailing or messaging and texting and sitting on that rather than picking the phone up, making that phone call, getting things done there and then. So I'm
Yeah,
glad you actually raised that. And I guess it goes perfectly with my question that if we could solve that where people are sitting on emails days on end and then the weekend rolls over and then a job becomes next Monday's job. If we can
yeah,
resolve that and bring that speed and efficiency like it used to be before,
yeah,
phones and emails and everything,
yeah,
came about, I think it will actually lead to a lot more clients being happy, a lot more successful businesses. So I
yeah.
think you hit the nail on the head.
I couldn't agree with you more, Iris. Couldn't agree with you
Absolutely.
more. Thanks.
Okay. And Peter, just to, I guess, finish up on what is the biggest piece of advice you've learned the hard way, or the biggest piece of advice you wish you knew when you started your journey that could actually help someone out listening to this very podcast?
It's probably don't get too down when you have your first knock.
Okay.
When it's a very prevalent story actually. So when I first started, I I had 8 or 9 clients already signed up with kind of like a potential revenue stream of about £780,000. If I found something for all of these clients, I was like, wow, that's the monumental amount of money for me and amazing. And then in the first 12 months, I didn't do an acquisition on the first 11 months. And I had a flat in London Bridge I was paying 2.5 grand a month for in rent. And I was having to rent that out on Airbnb for 150 quid a night and stay in a hostel on Borough High Street, St Christopher's Inn, for a tenner a night just to pay my rent, just so I could keep going. And I think the reason that it took me so long to do a deal is because I was forgetting to just be myself and believing in myself and knowing what I was good at, and I was trying to force the issue. And I think it's so easy to turn around and say to somebody, you know, just believe in yourself, have self-confidence. And obviously it doesn't work like that. But if that's ever a testament, or if anybody can take anything away from that podcast, like I was really low there, you know, my parents didn't have much. I didn't want to go back to them, cap in hand, and say, you know, I'm absolutely skint and I've got all this potential money and blah, blah, blah. But then it actually took me to do like 3 weeks living with a friend of mine out in Epping, out of the city, got out of the rat race, just got my head into a space. And then, sure enough, after I'd kind of calmed myself down psychologically, that was when, funnily enough, the Michael deal that I told you about, the big £6 million deal happened, and I never looked back from there. So yeah, just kind of back yourself and don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't work out at the start.
Amazing. Very well said. Thank you very much for that, Peter. So,
That's all
Peter,
right.
thank you very, very much. I've really enjoyed the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure everyone has really
Me
found a
too.
lot of value from the insights, from the challenges, from the advice. So, thank you very much for that. But I guess thank you for everyone who has tuned in. Any final words, Peter, from yourself before we do wrap up?
Yeah, just it's been a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for being a great host. I hope people have found it relatively interesting. I hope people can understand my accent. And yeah, if you or anybody else are looking to buy something completely unique and just want some general advice, you know, I'm not a you know, we're not pushy people. If you just want to know, you know, whether just find out whether or not it's for you, then you know, then drop us a line, loft.co.uk.
I think. Well, thank you very much, everyone.